Welcome to beautiful Minute Maid Park and to the most historic part of our park. This is Union Station, the historic train station which served Houston back in the day of train travel. Our wonderful Minute Maid Park was built adjacent to this, and you'll have a chance to see the whole thing during the game this afternoon. But we want to start off our time together this afternoon with one bit of protocol. Silence your electronic devices, please. And as we've done with the panels back at the hotel, if you have a question you would like to ask one of these illustrious gentlemen, you will raise your hand and one of our interns will bring you a card, and then they'll pick that back up and it will come to the panel at the end at about 45 minutes. We've got Michael right over here with the cards. Thanks, Michael. All right. Without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Bill Brown. Bill has been the voice of the Astros, and for many of us, a huge source of baseball information, reference, and innuendo over all these years that he has broadcast. He is also a wonderful writer, and he has done a great job this week promoting the SABR conference during his broadcast. Thank you, Bill. Will introduce you to the three multi-talented gentlemen who are up here this afternoon.
Thank you, Marcia. Marcia's worked very hard on this as well. Is Tal Smith out there anywhere? Well, I wanted to recognize him if he was, and I know he's been at the other panels and he's been recognized, but he left a huge footprint on this franchise, as you all know, and he deserves a lot of credit for it. I think everyone up here can say that he's been a big part of everything we've been allowed to do here in Houston. If you do not mind, Pete Van Weren passed away today. Yeah, and I'm sorry to pass that news along to you. So could we have a brief moment of silence for the former Atlanta Braves broadcaster, Pete Van Weren? Thank you. And now we're ready to get on with it. Yeah, Marcia, this is an exciting place. We got lucky, and I'd like to thank the fire marshal for not allowing us to be in that other room where we were supposed to be, out above center field, but because this room has a lot more character than that. That was a huge room, and it had a window looking out into the stadium, but this gives you the character, as Marcia said. This is an old train station. It was more than 100 years old. My mother-in-law, once upon a time, took a train from Missouri down here, and some of you may have relatives who passed through this. And as this ballpark was being built, Drayton McLean loved the fact that this could be the entryway into the stadium. And I think now something like 30% of the people who come to games choose this entrance to come on into the ballpark. And it gives you the flavor and the character of things a long time ago. And that's what most of us are all about, looking at things a long time ago and then current trends. But as they raised the roof here, it had gradually been lowered several times down through the years. So the architects really did not have any idea of the work at the top of the ceiling, which is just gorgeous, and that was revealed as they did the work on this to bring it up to modern day standards. So here you are, sitting where people did more than 100 years ago, waiting for a train. And now we're waiting for a ball game. And while we do, let's talk about three guys who have really been instrumental in the history of this franchise. And just to get us going, I'd like to pop around with each guy, just a brief story about how he got to the Astros. First of all, you've already heard from Larry Dierker, and if you haven't been inside the stadium yet, you'll see his number 49 retired there atop the stadium, and you're well aware that he was the first 20-game winner in the history of this franchise. Back in '69, he was an all-star. In 1969, not only did he win 20 games, he completed 20 games, and he pitched 305 innings. Dirk, I hate to call you a dinosaur, but that's just not, that's not close to happening anymore. Dirk, and then of course, a great successful manager, 4 playoff appearances in 5 years, and a tremendous broadcaster, so his fingerprints are all over this franchise too, as you well know. But I love the story, Dirk, about when you signed with the Colt 45s in '64. So can you tell that story about how they were bidding with the Cubs, and how the money got better and better, and how you didn't want to go to college?
Well, I didn't mind going to college. I just was hoping they'd give me enough money that my dad would let me play baseball instead. And I promised him that I would go to college during the off season, which I did. And I think that probably helped me with some of the stuff that I did afterwards. But the Cubs and the Colt 45s were the two teams that stayed serious right down toward the end. And the scout for the Cubs was a guy named Gene Hanley, and he offered me $30,000, which is what my dad said I'd have to get before he would co-sign with me and let me play. And so I was happy about that. And then the Colt 45s called. They didn't come over to the house, but they called and offered me 35. And I had promised Gene Hanley that I wouldn't sign because he said, I think the 45s are going to offer you more money, but you'd be much better off with the Cubs. We've got a good young team. You know, you could make it up pretty quickly, and I'm going to call and see if I can get them to give me the go-ahead to offer you a little bit more money. So if you will just give me until tomorrow and don't sign with the 45s. So 45s called, offered me 35, and I said, well, I'd like to, but I promised Mr. Hanley that I wouldn't sign until tomorrow because he wants to see if the Cubs can offer more money. So a half an hour later, they called again and it was 40. A half an hour later, it was 45. Another half hour, it was 50. By the time the night was over, it was 55. It was one of those deals where, you know, the pen was in your pocket and it was leaking ink. You wanted to sign so bad. And then they gave me a scholarship, so I had my college paid for too. But another story that is kind of interesting is when I actually signed the next day. The scout was a guy named Jim Wilson, and he had pitched for about 10 years in the big leagues. And you know, as I signed the contract, he said, I think you're going to make it up here with the 45s pretty quickly. You've got a good major league career in front of you. But I want to tell you right now, before you even start, that I hold one major league record that you will never break. And I said, what's that? He said, I played 10 years and I never slid once. And I only broke that record by about 3 or 4. I never slid into a base in my whole career. I slid into home plate a few times.
That's good stuff, Dirk. Now, Art Howe is from Pittsburgh. He went to the University of Wyoming, and I want him to tell the story about how he got into pro baseball. But the Astros got him in a trade for Tommy Helms, and then he went on to play all 4 infield positions, rather, for the Astros, and was on some of their best teams, and then later became a manager. And as you know, he managed Oakland, 3 playoff appearances with the A's, 102 wins in 2002. And then he managed the Mets as well. Now he's doing some TV pregame and postgame shows here on CSN Houston. And Art, tell us about when you went back to Pittsburgh after Wyoming and you were trying to get into pro ball.
Well, I graduated from the University of Wyoming in 1969. And I had a couple injuries playing my senior year, so I had to have a couple operations done. So I knew that there was no interest in me as far as baseball was concerned, so I went to work for Westinghouse in Pittsburgh. The following summer, I played in a league called the Federation League. It was a semi-pro league in Pittsburgh, and I was doing really well, and a fellow worker of mine used to come out and watch me play, and I was kind of tearing the league up, but at the time I was 23 years old, I expected to tear the league up. But he was a big baseball fan, and he said, hey, you know, how come no one has signed you? And I told him, I'm 23, I'm too old. He says, well, if I contact all the major league teams and get you a tryout, will you go? And I figured, yeah, sure. You know, I figured if he's going to go through all that trouble, the least I can do is just go show up. Well, sure enough, only one team had a tryout camp left, and it happened to be Pittsburgh, in my hometown. So I had to do it just because he went through so much trouble. Well, I went out, worked out for 6 hours on AstroTurf, first time I was ever on AstroTurf, and about 90 degrees that day. Took infield with a couple different groups. They timed me in a 60-yard dash a couple different times. Well, by the end of the day, they asked 3 of us to stay, and everybody else, there was over 200 kids in this tryout camp. So they asked 3 of us to stay, myself, Ken Maka, who became a big league player and manager, and another gentleman who I can't recall. But they had us take extra hitting. They told the other 2 guys to go home. They made me take more ground balls at short. I had pitched in high school for the state championship my junior year. When I was walking off the field, they said, "Oh, you pitched too, don't you?" So I got on the mound and I threw about 30 or 40 pitches. My arm was hanging. I was like a wet sponge, just totally exhausted. They said, "Well, thanks for coming, Art." I went in, and I remember I was the only guy in the clubhouse. Sat down. I was totally worn out. Took a shower, went home. My wife asked me, "Well, how'd it go?" And I told her how it went. The next day, I got a call from the Pirates, and they offered me a free agent contract. The free agent contract back then was 0. And that was, they were going to give me an opportunity to come to spring training the next year and see if I could make a team. And that's all I needed. I'm going.
Then you fast forward that a couple of years, and Bill Madlock, a batting champion, I think a couple of times, is the third baseman for the Pirates, and they bring up this kid, Art Howe, and I'm pitching that day, and I go and look at the lineups in the locker room, and Madlock's not playing, and Art Howe's playing third base. I'd never heard of Art Howe. I didn't read the sporting news like you guys do, so I didn't know what was going on in the minor leagues. And I said, "Art Howe, no Bill Madlock." "All right." So Artie goes out and gets 3 hits off me, and they beat us.
Every dog has his day.
And my TV partner, Alan Ashby, now we have some folks here from Toronto. I met some of you guys yesterday, so you know all about him. Yeah. Glad to have you in Houston. Hope it's not too hot for you. It actually could be hotter this time of year. Ash was a Blue Jay, expansion draft after starting out with Cleveland, grew up in Southern California. And then the Astros got him in a trade for lemon jello. You ever heard of a guy being traded for lemon jello? It was Mark Lemoncello, a pitcher. And Ash, at this point, it's your 3rd team. What are you thinking when that trade's made?
My honest answer, I was living out in Southern California at the time. I got a phone call from a gentleman who was a reporter for the Toronto Blue Jays at the time. And I had not followed what was going on with the expansion draft because I had been told I was going to be protected by the Indians at the time. So I didn't think anything of it, didn't realize even what the names of the 2 new teams were going to be. And this reporter said to me, "Can you give me a reaction about being traded to the Blue Jays?" And with all due respect to the Toronto Blue Jays and their world championships and all that comes along with it, I thought I was then told that I was traded to the Brownies, the Girl Scouts. And that's what it sounded like to me. And I got done trying to make something up positive on the phone and sat there and kind of cried to myself. I thought I've gone from the Cleveland Indians, who would be a team that a lot of people would say, "Wouldn't you like to rather play in the big leagues?" But I was instead playing for the Indians. But then I was traded to the Brownies, and that's kind of how that whole thing set up for me. By the way, I've had way more than one pitcher cheer that my name was in the lineup. And not on my side. I sat in the Astros locker room back in '79-'80 between Art Howe and Bruce Bochy, who have gone on to be major league managers and great ones. And that wasn't to be my destination, although I did manage a few years in the minor leagues. And my signing experience was nowhere near like these guys. A little bit more like Art than like Dirk, but I was drafted by the Indians early 3rd round back in '69. And the scout came to my house that night, and he sat down and had pleasantries for about 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 5 at most. And he said, "What is it you guys are prepared to, what is it you want to ask for?" And we told the guy, because I had another experience with a friend who had signed for $40,000, and I said, $40,000. And he quickly took his briefcase, closed it up, stood up, and headed for the door. And we said, whoa, Within 10 minutes of his entry into the house, I had signed a contract with the Indians, and that was my entry into professional baseball. So it took no time. It took one bluff on his part toward the front door, and we were signed, and that was pretty much it.
You've told me another story. You got traded to the Blue Jays, and a guy I played a lot of years with here in Houston, Doug Rader, also got traded to the Blue Jays. And Alan told me one time that what Doug said right after he got there, the manager had a team meeting, and then what happened after the meeting?
Yeah, let me take it from here. the Toronto Blue Jays, we were in, I believe, that was either 77 or 78. It might have been 77 the first year, pardon me. But there was a great deal of pride conversation for Blue Jays Toronto uniform in the clubhouse, and our manager, Roy Hartsfield, would get the veins going in the neck, much like Art Howe would do in his managing days, and just yelling at us that we better have pride. So this had gone on and on and on, and it turned out we were in Seattle. Rooster had been traded to the Blue Jays, and it turned out that Peter Bavasi, the GM, was also in the manager's office, and if you can picture that office was like this stand up in front of the locker room. Well, Bavasi and Hartsfield were in the manager's office. Rooster walked in, picked up his uniform off of the locker, this blue version of the Toronto Blue Jays uniform with Blue Jays on it, and he started to laugh uproariously out loud, grabbed the uniform in front of everybody, and started singing a little silly song, "Work, Jays, work, work," and he was just as loud and annoying as could be. And you could see Bavasi and Hartsfield poke their heads out from the door and look, and had it been anybody else, it would have been, see ya, you're banished, you're gone, go home and work in the factory. But Rooster, they just pulled their heads back in. And that began the days. And Rooster saw Bavasi and he said, "Hey, Peter, if I do good, do I get called up?" And that was when we all knew we were in for trouble with Rooster.
And that's the only Raider story we can tell.
Yeah, that was tempered a little bit, by the way.
I've got one about Ash. When I first met Ash, he came over, he's streamlined. Most catchers are a little on the chunky side. And he was sitting in the locker room one day and he says, "I remember one of the writers, I guess it was up in Toronto or in Cleveland, wrote something in the paper about Ash's speed." He says,
it was a report card at mid-season, that mid-season report card. And they were listing hitting and defense and speed. And under speed, mine said deceiving. Slower than he looks.
But it did not stop him from becoming the best catcher in Astros history. He's been voted as the best catcher in Astros history. So Dirk, you're with this fledgling team, the Colt 45s, and pitching was good. Not a lot of run support at that point. Just trying to build, get better players. What was it like in the beginning?
Well, for me, I was starstruck, not so much by the Hall of Fame players that surrounded me in the locker room, but just by the Astrodome and the fact that I was in the major leagues when I'd just been in high school 3 months prior to that. And I think the reason I was able to stick, to pitch well enough to not get sent back down to the minor leagues and pitch the whole year when I was 18 is, one, I wasn't afraid. I had good enough stuff that if I threw strikes, I could get outs, and I didn't have to be able to throw my breaking ball behind the count, and I didn't have to hit corners right from the first pitch. I had a lot of movement on my fastball. They taught me a slider, which made all the difference in the world. So it wasn't, maybe 20 or 30 years, innings into my career when I thought, I can pitch here. And I'd grown up in a family where they were always, encouraging me and telling me I was so smart and I was so talented and you could do anything. Oh, you can do anything. And then, I'd heard that all my life, and now I was doing it. And it was just fun. And the other thing that helped a lot, I think, is that there was no expectation whatsoever that we would be a contending team. So there really wasn't that much pressure. All the other front of me, and it was fun. I can't tell you how much fun it was to break in under those circumstances, to be that young and travel around the country and see all these cities and pitch against all these stars that I'd seen at Dodger Stadium and not really feel like if I lost the game, I was blowing it for the team and we'd fall out of the race or anything. So it felt great. It was intoxicating. It was eye-opening. It was just vivid. And I guess that's the best way I can explain it. I'm sure you can imagine it. It is hard to explain.
I doubt if any of us could even imagine being 18 years old, making a major league debut and striking out Willie Mays, though. Art?
I can attest to that. I actually went to see Dirk pitch against the Pirates when he was 18 years old. And I had a real nice seat down along the first base side in Ford's Field. And Dirk went like a hot knife through butter through a real good Pirate lineup. Clemente, Stargell, I mean, they were just great offensive hitters. I think he struck out 12 to 15 that night, 18 years old. And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't think I'll ever get to the big leagues. If this is an 18-year-old throwing like this. But it was awesome. He had great stuff.
And then, Dirk, when you make that debut at age 18, they gather you around the birthday cake for the photo. And this had to be a little surreal for you at that point, right?
Yeah, well, that photograph has been spread widely around, and I look like I'm about 14, not 18, because I was baby-faced to begin with. And in fact, I'll digress a little bit. That first year when I came up with the Colt 45s, my last game was in relief, and it was against the Dodgers. And I struck Frank Howard out twice in that outing, and you know how big he was. And so after the game, one of our writers, Mickey Herskowitz, came up to me and he said, "Hey, you struck Frank Howard out twice." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Were you scared?" And I said, "Yeah, I was really scared." He said, "Well, what did you throw him?" And I said, "Well, I just threw it break, my slider, I just threw it down in the dirt low and away, and he swung at it. And I just only did that because my brother told me that if I just throw breaking balls in the dirt, he would swing at them." And Mickey said, "Your brother? How old is he?" 14.
So, Art, you come to Houston, and was it Danny Murtaugh was the manager in Pittsburgh when you were there? Who was your manager in Pittsburgh?
Danny Murtaugh.
Danny Murtaugh. And then you come to Houston, and what's your first realization when you arrive and get a little feel for the scene here about what kind of an organization it is, the manager and all that?
Well, at first, I really didn't want to be here, to be honest with you, because the 2 years I spent in Pittsburgh, we won our divisions both years. And I was coming to a team that lost 105 games the year before. And I'll tell you the truth, the first week or so of spring training, that's when I really wanted to get out of Dodge. Because when I was with the Pirates, they talked about baseball and what they had to do to win. And to be honest with you, in our clubhouse, guys were talking about fishing and hunting and anything but baseball. And I'm thinking, I don't know if I want to be around this. But in time, the organization got better and better, and I was really fortunate to be a part of that growing process. Tal Smith did a great job of putting great talent together, and Bill Burton came in as was the manager at that time. And slowly but surely, we were able to come on and win the division in 1980, and I was proud to be a part of that, along with Ash. And one thing about Dirk, when I saw him when he was 18, he was up here. When I came over here in 76, he was out of here. So that 305 innings that he was throwing almost every year started taking its toll because that arm slot started dropping, and he was a side armor when I got here.
Gravity always wins.
Yeah, you're right. But you had enough left to pitched the no-hitter in '76 against Montreal.
Yeah, that was a blessing for me. It was like a gift from God because I didn't have much left. I wasn't throwing hard. I was sidearm, and I try to sink the ball and cut the ball. My slider's pretty flat, and I was getting hit around some. I was able to win games that year just because of my experience. I had a couple of thousand innings behind me, and I knew how to pitch, but I didn't have much to pitch with. And so I remember going into that game, I had this thought in my mind that I had to just make pitches, because I had this sense, and you can feel it in the clubhouse when you're with a ball club, you know, how people, what they think of you and everything. And we had a bunch of younger pitchers we were bringing up, and I kind of felt like they thought I was at the end, and I thought I'd been overthrowing and trying to prove that I could still throw hard, and that my control was suffering just because of that. So that was my thought going in. And the first 5 or 6 innings, that's what I did. I sunk the ball, cut the ball, threw a slider here, threw a little back door, moved it around, you know, pitched to contact, make them hit it. You know, I had 1 or 2 strikeouts and 3 or 4 walks because I was, you know, pitching the better hitters very carefully. And about the 6th inning, I look up and there's no hits. Well, I knew all along there were no hits, but about the 6th inning, I started to feel this adrenaline kick. And in the 7th inning, it threw mostly fastballs. And in the 8th and 9th inning, my 18-year-old fastball came back to me. I was throwing hard, and I was throwing these cutters like this. I struck out 4 guys in the last 2 innings and finished it like that. And, you know, I think all of us saw Nolan's 5th no-hitter. Last pitch was a curveball. Ashton caught a bunch of no-hitters. I don't know if those guys continued with their normal repertoire or if they got some kick. But for me, that's what I remember the most, is that at the end I could finally throw hard again. And that it happened when I least expected it. I'd had a couple of other no-hitters in the 9th and lost them. I never even considered it. So afterwards, I would say almost every guy that pitches a no-hitter, the first question is, when did you know you had a no-hitter going? And I said, honestly, I knew right after the 1st inning because I came into the dugout and I was trying to remember the last time I got through the 1st inning without giving up a hit.
And you know, the weird thing was that so many fans kept leaving their seats after that strikeout you had.
Yeah, well, you know, I've always been a guy that liked to go have a beer or 2 after the game. And so maybe it was just fated as well that we had a promotion back then. We didn't have a very good team, so we tried to lure college students in with beer promotions. And this was a deal where they put a red light up on the scoreboard, and every other minute the light would come on. And if you struck out one of the hitters on the designated guy on the other team while the light was on, everybody got free beer for the rest of the game. And so I struck out Pete McCannon in the 6th inning, and I set the house up with free beer.
Yeah, I remember one time JR was pitching under the same circumstance, and the light went out. He had 2 strikes on the hitter, and he stepped back off the mound and started rubbing the baseball up, looking at the light, and the fans started roaring. It was great. He stepped back up when the light came on, strike 3, everybody going up to the beer.
And Dirk said the fans would get up, you know, you get in line, get your beer, and they'd start drinking it and go back in line again. And so they're missing his no-hitter, drinking free beer.
No, that's what they told me. A lot of guys, you know, the young guys, when they got the free beer, they just get the beer, go back to the end of the line, and see how many beers they could. So there were some significant number of people that were at that game, never knew that they had a chance to witness a no-hitter.
They knew how many beers they had, but not how many hits the other team had.
You gotta have your priorities straight, right?
Well, the original promotion was an Astro hitting a home run when the light was on, but nobody ever hit a home run, so they changed it to strikeouts by Astros pitchers. Cavernous place. And now Ash arrives on the scene in '79, and this club is now ready to win. So these guys, you know, they put in all this hard work for you, Ash. and you're here to reap the rewards. And you guys had a good team in '79, had a nice lead there.
Yeah, we did, and I'll get to that in a moment. Beer night, I was part of the 10-cent beer night in Cleveland. In fact, I was on first base. I had gotten the last hit of that ball game before the Indians had it taken away. But yeah, that's my real claim to fame in my life. So you thought
Were you there when they jumped over the left field fence and
yeah.
started swinging folding chairs and stuff like
Oh
that?
yeah, I was on the field. Yeah. A lot of streakers too, and I think I recognize some faces. But yeah, 1979. When I joined the ball club, I want to say we played the Atlanta Braves, Artie, the first stand at home. And I think the Braves played 3 or 4 games and left town with 4 hits. And part of the reason was that Ken Force threw a no-hitter. That was the first of the 3 that I would catch. Phenomenal day. And then in 1981, Nolan Ryan would throw his 5th. And I had grown up in LA watching 2 of Sandy Koufax's 4 no-hitters. I believe he threw 3 in LA, but I saw a perfect game in 1 other. And he was one of my idols. And so there I am latching onto the coattails of Nolan Ryan, and then got Mike Scott's improbable no-hitter on clinching day in 1986. So just some great stuff, a lot of fun in that regard. Trying to recall what you added there,
So in '79, you had a good club, but the Reds overtook you.
Well, Tom Seaver said at midseason that we would fall like a lead balloon. He proved to be right, as it turned out. I think we had a 10.5 game lead. I wound up breaking a finger for the first time, actually, and missed the entire month of September, I believe. But yeah, that was a really hard time, but it was a realization that we were a pretty good ball club. And I think that's where it kind of kicked in for the Houston Astros at that point.
Would add another footnote in about, because I was broadcasting at the time when Mike Scott threw that no-hitter, and I don't know if you remember that clearly, you probably do, but I just researched it recently. On a Sunday, Jim Deshaies started against the Dodgers and struck out the first 8 batters.
Tommy was sort of pinch hit for the pitcher so that 9 straight wouldn't strike out. At least that's the perceptible story that we came out of that with, yeah.
So then he stopped striking people out. He didn't strike another batter out, but he pitched 9 innings and he pitched a 2-hit shutout. Well, then the Giants came into town, and the very next night, Nolan goes out and he's got a no-hitter in the 8th inning. And he loses the no-hitter, but he strikes out 13 guys. So now in 2 games, they have a total of 3 hits and 21 strikeouts. And the next day, Mike Scott goes out and pitches a no-hitter. For 3 straight games, you had 2 hits, 1 hit, and no hits, no runs. I don't know how many Scotty struck out, but probably 40 strikeouts and about 3 walks.
And if you want to see the fattest pitches of the games of Nolan's no-hitter and of Mike Scott's no-hitters, watch the last out. The final fly ball to Dusty Baker right down the middle, and the final pitch of the game from Mike Scott to Will Clark right down the middle. And they rolled over him, hit ground balls, and we got out. But it's rather amazing to see the makeup of an actual no-hitter.
And Art fielded that final out of the no-hitter by Nolan. And what was Denny Walling doing over there?
Well, Denny was at first base. And I'm thinking, Dusty Baker's at the plate. He's a pull hitter all the way. First of all, I'm a little upset with Ash calling for a curveball there, because I didn't want the ball into me.
I had no power over Nolan Ryan.
So, I'm watching him play the ball, and I know it's a breaking ball. And the barrel of the bat comes around, and sure enough, here it comes. It's the only ground ball I had hit to me in the game. It's the last out of the game. So the first thought that went through my mind is get in front of it, because if you boot it, it'll be an error. You don't want this to be given a hit for some reason or other. So I tried to get in front of it. It was an in-between hop. I caught it cleanly, and I look up to throw to first. And Denny, who's playing first, is just on his way to first base to cover first. Well, I treated him like a wide receiver. I just threw it to the bag and was hoping he'd get there when the ball got there. And sure enough, the ball got there about the same time Denny did. It was a hot potato. I just wanted to get rid of that ball, get that final out. And it was a thrill for me to be a part of it.
So after the '79 season, the near miss for the playoffs, Joe Morgan comes back as a free agent. Nolan Ryan signs as a free agent. You guys going to spring training, Ash, 1980, feeling pretty good about this.
Yeah, we had developed a lot of confidence the previous year, 79, and then to bring those guys in. Nolan was a legend. Joe Morgan was a two-time MVP. And yeah, it set up for a really good ball club. We won the division that year. We would win the mini playoffs in the strike-shortened 81 season. And that was a rather phenomenal end of that year. But in the cases of the 1980s, each year, 1980, we lost to the Philadelphia Phillies after having, in a best-of-5 series, is all it was back then. We had a 2-1 lead and a lead in the 9th inning or 8th inning in games 4 and 5 and lost to the Phillies. They won the World Series. In 81, we won the first 2 games on late home runs against the Dodgers. We went out to LA and lost the next 3, and the Dodgers won the World Series. And in 1986, a team by the name of the New York Mets beat us after the 16-inning game in the Astrodome, and they won the World Series. So those were tough to stomach.
Yeah, it was riveting. Those games. I was in the broadcast booth in the Astrodome. It was the press level was not very deep. So it was it was field boxes, the mezzanine, and then the press level, and then another narrow level, which is the loge. And I would say, it's just, if I'm sitting right here, these people in the front row are about where the fans started in the mezzanine. And if you stood up, that's where the ceiling was. So in the press section, during that series with the Mets, the people were stomping their feet so hard and yelling so much that I could feel the whole level. I thought it might cave in. It was so loud. And, some people in that 16-inning game told me that they couldn't stand it anymore. They went out to their cars and sat in the parking lot and listened to the last couple of innings out there.
I honestly don't recall which came first, but Art, you would remember 1980 with the Dodgers in there. Was it the Dodgers in 1980? Now I'm trying to remember. Phillies, that's right. The Astrodome chanting Houston Astros. And I assume in my memory that fades that the Oilers might have had their first share of that, but it was off the charts. I mean, that was unbelievable.
Yeah, that was a thrill. I mean, I wish I could explain to you. I mean, it gave you goosebumps as a player. The first time that the fans in Houston really, really got behind their team, the Astros. I mean, it was reverberating. You couldn't hear anything other than Houston Astros, back and forth, and it meant a ton to us as players, I'll tell you that.
And as a footnote to that, the way that we got into that 1980 playoff series was in the 163rd game of the 1980 season. We went to LA, and we needed to win 1 game to clinch. We had the lead in all 3 games. The Dodgers hit home runs in all 3 games in the 8th or 9th inning. And we lost all 3 of them and had to play a 1-game tiebreaker the next day on Monday. And in that game, Joe Niekro went the distance, and Art Howe was a hitting star. You hit 2 home runs, didn't you? Well,
And he was 7-time manager of the year.
Hey, Art, tell that story about Doug Harvey being home plate umpire on your home run.
Oh, yeah. I came to the plate, we were up about, let's see, we had scored a run or 2 in the first inning, had jumped out, and I came up in the 3rd or 4th inning with a man on second and 2 outs, and I had a 1-2 count on me. Jim Gott was pitching for the Dodgers. They had just gotten him from, was it Cleveland or something?
No, it was Dave Goltz.
Oh, Goltz.
Dave Goltz.
Dave Goltz. I'm losing it. Well, he had a knuckle curveball. He had me 1-2. He threw me this curveball. It started at the top of the strike zone, and I just kind of froze, and I knew it was strike 3. But it was going to be a high strike, so I kind of squatted. And I'm waiting to hear, Doug Harvey was a home plate umpire. And we used to call him God, because he never missed a pitch. And he goes, ball. And you can't believe how relieved I was to hear that. Well, Joe Ferguson's catching for the Dodgers, and he goes crazy. You know, Doug, that's a strike. The inning should be on. What the heck is going on here, you know? And I looked back at Doug Harvey, and he looked at me, and he said, Art, don't take that pitch again. And as God is my witness, he threw the exact same pitch, and I hit it out of the ballpark. Coming towards home plate, and I can hear Fergie still yelling at Harvey. And when I went by, I said, I didn't. It just kept going.
Ash, how much did that mess you guys up? It was a great win, very exciting time to be going into the playoffs against the Phillies, but Joe Niekro had to pitch that extra game, so he was not available.
Well, I'd love to say it really messed us up and maybe took things away from us for the next series, but we went ahead again, 2-1 in that best-of-5 series, so it's really hard to say, but we did let things get away. You know, I do want to say about that particular day, game 163 that Larry mentions, I was staying at home. I lived in Southern California, so I wasn't sure what was going on the team bus or all that sort of thing coming into the ballpark, but I wondered what was going to take place in the clubhouse. Was Bill Verdon going to have a big, serious meeting? How was it all going to go down? What was the mood of the club going to be? And we got into the clubhouse, and one of our team leaders got up on the table, Jose Cruz, in his underwear only, and danced for us. And we had some serious laughs. And the laughs went right out to the dugout and into the ball game. And like Artie says, we scored the first. And it's not always like you imagine. That's all I would tell you.
And that was one of the
Another thing about that series, we went in there, we had to win one game just to clinch the division. And each night, all the media were in our dugout before the game, you know. Almost like saying, well, you guys are going to win today, wrap it up or whatever. Each day they were in our dugout. Now, game 163, they were all in the Dodger dugout. And I thought to myself, that's an omen, boys. We got this one wrapped up.
Dirk, you were broadcasting that series, 4 extra inning games out of the 5. That was one of the great playoff series. I don't think it gets enough credit for being as good as it was.
No, actually, it was a more closely fought series than 1986, but people remember 86 because of Mike Scott primarily. But we still, if we had won that game, he would have been pitching game 7. And so everybody assumed, well, Mike Scott's going to pitch the next day. If the Mets don't win this one, it's over. The Astros are going to the World Series. Well, I can tell you that from the standpoint of a pitcher, even Mike Scott, as good as he was that year, you wouldn't take for granted that the Mets are going to roll over and you're going to just beat them the next day just because you've beaten them twice already. So I wasn't counting on the fact that if we could win the penultimate game, that we would win the ultimate game. But I think it was the best team we ever had. And one of the teams I managed won 102 and won 97, and that 96 club won 96 games, so it was only the 3rd best record, but it was a better balanced team. The starting pitcher was more overpowering than what we had in 98, except for Randy Johnson. The rest of our pitchers were more control pitchers. And we had much better left-hand, right-hand balance in 86. We had more base stealing speed in 86. We didn't have as much home run power, but playing half your games in the Dome, the home run's not that much of a factor anyway. So I think, you know, if the team that I had in 98 with Randy Johnson had gone into the playoffs against our 86 team, I'm not sure we could have beat them. And I thought that team the Mets had that year was possibly the best team in the National League since the Big Red Machine. They were talented everywhere, deep in pitching, relief pitching. They had a strong bench. They were fast, and they didn't make one single error in that series. They didn't have any bonehead plays on the bases. They played a perfect series, and then they went. When they beat us in that 16-inning game, they went and played the Red Sox in the World Series. And the Mets looked like Marv Thornberry and friends against the Red Sox. They were making 2 or 3 innings, errors every game. They were getting caught in rundowns. And they did eventually win it on the Bill Buckner error. But I kept thinking if the Mets would have played sloppy baseball like this against us, we'd be in the World Series. But they didn't.
There's one thing I want to bring up about the 1980 playoffs. If we had been able to win one of those last 3 games, we would have had Joe Niekro starting the series against Philly. He only got to pitch 1 game, and I think he beat him 1-0.
And he did beat him 1-0.
Yeah, and he was our ace at that time. So we didn't get to use our ace 2 of those 5 games. That hurt us. But number 2, a guy named J.R. Richard wasn't available anymore. He had the stroke that summer. And so our 2 top pitchers didn't really get to pitch. J.R. not at all. And obviously, Knucksie would have been starting the first game of the playoffs. So things really didn't work out well for us. But if JR would have been available, I'd be wearing a couple of rings right now, I'll tell you that.
We have some questions from you, and I'm glad there are about 3 questions, Art, for you. I'm glad they came up because you folks are from all over the country, and you've seen the movie Moneyball, and it was a terrible, terrible portrayal of Art Howe in that movie. Very, very unfair. And the questions are about that. So, Art? They're asking you, how did you feel about the portrayal of you in Moneyball? What did you think of the portrayal of you and your coaches? And obviously it was sensationalized, but what happened in your eyes that year?
Yeah, well, I obviously didn't like the movie. I lived it. No, anybody who ever played for me or played with me knows that I'm kind of easygoing, always smiling, having a good time in the movie. I don't think Seymour Hoffman smiled one time in the movie. He was grumpy and anti-everything Billy Beane did. You know, obviously I didn't agree with everything Billy did, but we certainly didn't have that kind of relationship. My wife was really upset to this day. But they never asked me for my input, not one bit. And people would ask me, well, did they talk to you about the movie? 0, nothing. They just went ahead and did it. I did read an article in Esquire several months after the movie, and Philip Seymour Hoffman was actually asked about his portrayal of me in Moneyball, and he said in this article that he realized that wasn't the way I was, but it was the way they had written the script, and he had to do it. And if he ever got a chance to meet me, he would know, he would apologize to me for the way he portrayed me. So,
but you know, if you've done a little writing and studied English like I have, there's one thing that you hear a lot of times, and it applies there. Don't let the truth stand in the way of a good story.
Art?
I had another year on my contract. They had me negotiating and asking for an extension in the hallway. And, you know, I had an agent. Those kind of things never happened. And as Dirk will attest, anytime a player is sent down or released or whatever, the manager is in the office telling that player about it. In the movie, they had me not even telling some players that they were sent out, but it's the furthest thing from the truth.
Weren't you going to play yourself in the movie originally?
Yes, actually, they had put together my actual staff and some of my actual players that played for me in 2002. We were all going to play ourselves in the movie, but the day before we were actually going to go and start the shoot, Sony, who produced the movie or whatever, backed it. They bagged it. They said it was going to be too much of a documentary, and they didn't want that kind of movie. So that's the way it goes. The fella who did the Ocean movies with Brad Pitt, Soderbergh, actually came to my house and interviewed me for 5 or 6 hours. He was going to produce it, and he was really upset when they bagged it. And we were actually all in LA ready to fly to Oakland to start the shoot the next day when they pulled the plug.
Ash, this is for you. What are some of the qualities, credentials, and experience you would like to see in the next baseball commissioner?
I'd like to see somebody who wears a watch. maybe has a family he wouldn't mind getting home to in the evening. Anybody who listens to our telecast knows that I'm not a fan of standing around and not playing baseball. I love baseball. I want to see it played. And I would love to see somebody who steps in and tidies up the game, get pitchers to throw. And I have my thoughts. I believe, I'll just quickly say it because it is quick, I believe that you can put what's in the rule book, which says pitchers have to throw within 12 seconds, put up like the NBA or the NFL has a shot clock, 12 seconds. Throw a pitch or it's a ball. Hitter walks off. No rules on the hitter. No rules. Let him do what he wants. But while he's having a little stroll, we're going to call strikes when the pitcher throws the pitch. So that's what I would do, pitcher, hitter. I would put time limits on guys for coming from the bullpen. They've got their 2 minutes from the time they're called. Use it wisely is what I would advise them to do because they're only going to get how many pitches they can deliver within that time frame. And I would start to play baseball once again. That's my thought, and that's my ideal commissioner.
I have one rule that I would like changed. I think most of the players who play the game, the 45-foot line going down to first base. A right-handed hitter hits a ground ball, and he's running directly to the bag. And because he's a little bit inside that line, the ball hits him or whatever, or if he drops down a bunt, they want you to run and then swerve outside the line, then step back into fair territory to step on the bag. Who in the world is going to run a circle route to get to first base? You're trying to get there as quickly as possible. As long as you're not on the grass, I think that they call the guy out. The other night there was a call, I think. That guy should have been called out. He was out on the grass. But within a foot or two, at least the width of the bag, they should be allowed to be in that dirt area running to the bag straight. But when they drop down a bunt and they call the runner out for being out of the baseline, that's the biggest joke in baseball. They got to throw that rule out and amend it some way.
By the way, just one other thing real quickly. I would go to the rule book once again and have bottom of the knees and under the letters as a strike zone and not expanding corners, but have umpires start to call strikes again and give pitchers a chance.
Let me put you guys on the spot. This is something I talked about yesterday at lunch, but you guys weren't there. The strike zone, as defined by the graphics that are used on television right now, compared to the strike zone that you see the umpires call in most games, do you think the umpires get it right more than the graphic, or do you think that the graphic gets it right more than the umpire?
Talking about the box.
The box.
It's a tough question because we don't know electronically.
We don't show much here.
What's that? What was that?
They don't put that box up on our telecast.
Right, we don't have it, but assuming they put that box in the right place, I would assume that the box gets it right more than the umpires. But
my point, and I think you two guys would agree with me, is that all you really want, whether you're the pitcher or the hitter, is for it to be consistent. And if the box wasn't exactly in the right place, at least it would be consistent. And we've all been in that situation. I throw a pitch and it's called a strike. It gets to 3-2, and I throw the same pitch and it's ball 4. Or you're hitting, and you take a pitch and it's a ball. It gets to 3-2, and they say throw the same pitch and they call it strike 3. I think you can just see balls and strikes better from the mound or the center field camera than you can if you're squatting behind the catcher.
I completely agree. Umpires that, as they all do now, work the inside corner. It's laughable, having been a catcher. They barely can call the inside corner correctly, let alone that corner that's out there. And I agree entirely.
I like the idea of them having that box now, though, because I think the umpires, they are being judged a little bit more, which is making them concentrate a little bit more. And I think most of you can recall the Braves. I could have gone to the Hall of Fame if I pitched back then, throw the ball this far outside, and have the umpire call it a strike.
Dirk, here's the question. In 1968, you had 20 wild pitches, which you never came close to again. what was different about 1968, and how did you fix that going forward into 1969?
Well, actually, 1968 was the year of the pitcher. It was the year the Drysdale pitched 59 scoreless innings, and Gibson had a 112, and the top batting average in the American League was 301, and I threw 20 wild pitches. Actually, if I hadn't thrown those 20 wild pitches, I probably would have won the Cy Young Award. But I don't remember. Memory is a funny thing when you look back at your career. And I felt like I was becoming a better pitcher in '68 because I went to winter ball in '67, and I worked a lot on throwing my slider and my off-speed pitches behind in the count, and I made progress. But I didn't really get to finish that progress until '69, which was a better season for me. It was my one really dominating season. And so after '68, they lowered the mound. I don't know if that helped me or not, if that's why I pitched better. I didn't really necessarily like a high steep mound that much more than a typical mound or one that seemed kind of flat. And I think it's because my arm is pretty much out here. And I think the guys who are right on top like to come over the top, with the Jim Palmer or Koufax riding fastball straight over the top curveball. And so I think a high mound was better for that. I don't think it was necessarily that much better for me. And the other thing that you have to deal with is that in each ballpark the mound's a little bit different. And when you warm up on the side, if it's a windy day, the wind's blowing a certain way and it affects your pitches. And then you get out on the mound and the wind's blowing a different way. And so whether it's park to park, whether it's weather and cold days, the balls are slippery, you have to keep making a lot of adjustments. And I think the guys that are the best at making the adjustments end up being the best pitchers.
Question for Art, what was it like to play for Danny Murtaugh?
Danny Murtaugh, he was great. He was really dry humor, real quiet guy. I'll tell you a quick story in AAA. I was in AAA for the Pirates, and we knew that Danny Murtaugh, the big leagues had a day off, so Danny came down to watch a AAA team play. And I'm playing third base. We got a one-run lead in the top of the ninth inning, and some guy hits a ball inside third base, past me down left field line. The guy ends up scoring to tie the game. An inning or so later, I come up, hit a home run to win the ball game. So fired up, walk-off home run. I'm in the bathroom after a shower, cleaning up. I don't know if I was shaving or not. And Mr. Murtaugh walked in, and he looked at me, and I'm thinking he's going to say, "Way to come through, kid." He said, "Art, if you ever expect to play for me, you'll never let a ball get between you and the bag from the seventh inning on with a tying or winning run at the plate. So if you ever expect to play in Pittsburgh, you better never let that happen again." And you talk about getting a wake-up call. It won't, sir, it won't. Because back then it was, no doubles. From the seventh inning on, if the tying or winning run was at the plate. That's an ism. And I learned that ism at an early age. And but one thing Danny would do is if he had a hot hand, he used to play basically the same 8 guys every night, day in, day out. But if somebody got hurt, I was playing behind Richie Hebner, and Hebner hurt his back one night or whatever, and couldn't play, so I got in the lineup, and we won. I don't know if I did anything or not, but the team won. So the next night, I was back in the lineup. So it went for like 7 days straight. We're winning. We put a 7-game win streak together. I know I'm going to be in the lineup. And sure enough, we lose. The next day, I'm sitting on the pine. So that's the way Danny did things, but it was nice to be able to play for that week straight.
But there are things that people at the major league level disagree on, and it's not necessarily right or wrong because it's hard to measure a lot of things. For me as a manager, I did not want the third baseman to guard the line until maybe an out in the ninth inning. I felt like if we had everybody in position where the hitter was most likely to hit the ball, he was still the most likely to hit the ball in those places in the 8th and 9th inning as it would be in the 1st or 2nd inning. So, I wasn't real strong on the no doubles. I did, as we get an out in the ninth, I'd start to modify that a little bit, but I didn't want to start at the 8th inning trying to protect a 1-run lead by switching around the defensive positioning. On the other hand, some managers like Murtaugh did it all the time. For me, as a pitcher, I didn't want the catcher to move out and give me a target on the corner until I was already starting into my delivery, because it bothered me that guys would peek. And they'd be here like this, and they'd see the catcher move, and they'd start to look for the ball. Did you ever peek? Yep. Did you ever peek? Okay. So I'm saying the catcher has 2 shoulders and 2 knees. If he squats down and puts his mitt right down the middle, if I hit either of his shoulders or either of his knees, I've hit the corner of the strike zone. So it doesn't bother me that the catcher's not right there with his mitt. On the other hand, Alan caught Nolan a lot. And Nolan wouldn't start his delivery until the catcher got right where he wanted to throw that pitch. So obviously he won more than twice as many games as I did, so I'm not going to say he's right and I'm wrong, but I will tell you that among pitchers, some guys are concerned about the hitters peaking, and some guys aren't.
Some guys throw 900 miles per hour, and the hitter can peak all he wants to. He still can't hit it. Folks, we are out of time. Thanks very much to Art Howe, Larry Dierker, Alan Ashby. Thank you, and have a great time.